I'm not really sure where I left off, so I'll just start with Bibi Bakila once again. Um, Mussolini invades Africa in the 1920s and 1930s. He invades um, Libya, and then he invades in the 1930s what at the time was called Abyssinia, which we today call Ethiopia, and it was a real brutal occupation. And the reason, just shows how almost how ludicrous um, and ridiculous Mussolini was. He invaded Libya simply because Carthage was the main opponent of Rome a couple hundred years BC. And he invaded Abyssinia because Ethiopia was another sort of opponent, sort of where the Roman Empire ended in southern Egypt. And there was constantly conflicts there. So, he's taking these 2,000-year-old things, and this is going to be our path back to the Roman glory. So, they invade these areas, and then the Italians are very, very brutal. Well, a couple decades later, Bibi Bakila comes, and no one knew much about him because back in those days, the really only international meets that were contested for people outside of U.S. and Europe were, particularly people from, the global South or the developing world, or what at that time was called the Third World, only could find the funds to come to the Olympics or maybe the World Championships. So you got to see them maybe once a year and find out how they ran races, or maybe once every 4 years. And so Abibi Bakila came out of left field. It was just like leading up to the Olympics. Someone was looking at times from a regional meet, and they saw this guy that was posting these kind of like unbelievable times. And so they weren't sure whether it was legitimate or not. He was a guy that, like, if he runs like these times say he is, he's a threat. But we've never heard this guy. We've never seen him run. And then when he showed up barefoot, people were like, okay, this guy's a joke. And he actually wanted to run in shoes. It's just the shoes that he had were very uncomfortable. And so then he runs barefoot and he wins. And he wins convincingly. And he wins in the heart of a country that 25 years earlier had invaded his own and committed all these terrible atrocities. So that was a highly political and amazing moment. And then, of course, I actually originally did both parts of that interview because there's some really cool stuff in the second part. And it's about 15 minutes for each clip. But I only had you watch the first one because they're both 15 minutes long and there was a lot of things to read and clips to watch. But yeah, Tommy Smith and John Carlos give the Black Power salute on the podium of the 200 meters. As John Carlos says, the message was, we're representing our race first. We're representing the United States second, because the U.S. always puts us dead last. So we're not going to put you dead last, but we're going to put you second. And, people, when I say people wanted to kill them, literally, there were death threats. It was way more controversial than Colin Kaepernick at the time. But today, I think most you could interview 100 people, and 97 of them would be very, very supportive of those two men and their protest of conscience. So here was a very famous cartoon from the 2014 World Cup, which was contested in Brazil, the Maracanã Stadium, a stadium that holds 200,000 people. Just let that set in for a second. A huge stadium, where where probably the average ticket price was $150 or something, probably anywhere from, well, actually probably more than that, probably anywhere from $100 to several thousand for primo seats, from people who have flown in from all over the world, who never have to worry about where their next meal is going to come from, who never have to worry about anything of that nature, with a kid that's clearly a fan, because he's wearing the 10 that Neymar probably would have worn, and the 10 is the goal scorer, the sort of the goal scorer on a team. you give them the number 10. I'm not sure why, but it's just always been that way. The only way this poor kid can participate, he loves soccer, obviously, he's got a soccer ball. The only way that he can participate in this is to watch the fireworks from afar. Doesn't even own a television. And then the irony is, I don't know if this was a post photograph or not. I wouldn't be surprised either way. This photograph was taken 2 years later when the Olympics, and you see this kind of tenement on the right that has holes in it, has windows that clearly don't have any panes of glass. You see graffiti, and here you have these kids. This is not a cartoon. This is real. Like I said, maybe someone said, "Hey, kids, can you come over? I want to take a picture." Who knows? Or it could have just been off the cuff. But it's essentially a sort of replication of this. So Mount Rushmore for men for America. Jesse Owens, clearly, for the politics. Al Order for the discus. He won it 4 times in a row. 4 Olympics over a 12-year period. It was like, I think, 56, 60, 64, and 68. And the interesting thing was he was never the favorite to win. There was always people that were consistently doing better than him, and he just rose to the level and always came out on top. That's dominant, and it's never been done before or since for somebody to win, for an individual to win gold medal in any sport, in any nationality, 4 times in a row. He's the only one. I really think Greg Louganis, for one of the sort of the beauty of it, Greg Louganis was a diver who, was just, amazing. It would look effortless as he would tumble through the air and then just enter just like a knife going into the water. Of course, he very infamously did a backflip and didn't judge the board right and hit his head on the back of a board and bled into the pool. And no one knew it at the time, but he knew that he had AIDS. And then actually came back and won that competition. But, his is about power, but also beauty and grace at the same time. And then Michael Phelps in swimming, I think what he did is just so dominant and so amazing to win 8 gold medals in a single. Although he's lucky that he was in a sport that had, can you imagine if discus, if Al Order, they'd had, 12 different types of competition. There's the round discus that weighs this much, and then the slightly bigger discus, and then they have the triangular discus, and then they have a discus with a handle on it. I mean, the discus has one competition. Swimming has like, a whole bunch. Apologies to Jim Thorpe. In multiple sports, in track and field and whatnot. Mark Spitz in swimming, Eric Heiden in speed skating on ice, Edwin Moses in hurdles, and Carl Lewis in track and field. With apologies to them, these are my 4. And then for women, probably the greatest athlete I've ever saw live. I saw Jordan live, but I remember watching Jackie Joyner-Kersee at Olympic trials and then seeing her at Olympics as well. And I was a kid, and I just remember thinking, she's the best athlete out there, male or female. She might not be able to go compete against the men, but I mean, she's getting the most out of her body and is just a student of the game. It's just not just physical, it was mental. I mean, she was everything. Jackie Joyner-Kersee, my guess is I'll go to my grave still thinking that she's the best athlete I ever saw in comparison with everyone around her. She was astonishingly good. And she did the heptathlon. So you have to be good at a lot of different things. The men do a decathlon. They have 10 events. Women do. She also did the long jump too. Bonnie Blair in speed skating. Okay. Mary Lou Retton in gymnastics. Less for her actual skill. She was quite skilled and she was quite good, but only at 1 Olympics. But more for what she did for women in sports. She came along in the decade sort of after Billie Jean King really made, and she was sort of like the next iteration of that. She appeared on a Wheaties box. I'd never seen a woman on a Wheaties box before. And it just seemed so natural for her to be there, because she did so well in the 1984 Olympics at gymnastics. So, I put Mary Lou Retton up there almost as much for what she did for the sport. She had a very brief, career where she dominated, and she mostly dominated because the Soviet bloc, the Romanians and the Soviets, boycotted the 1984 Olympics. But she just little girls all over the nation. And I was 11, so it was a lot of my classmates. I mean, they were just. It meant so much to them. You could see that it meant so much to people. That Mary Lou Retton. So I put her up on here, and then Jenny Thompson in swimming. At one point Michael Phelps passed her in total medals, but it took him a while. She was really good, and I apologize to Peggy Fleming in ice skating, Wilma Rudolph in track and field, who went from her parents were told she might never walk normally, so she just decided she would run everywhere to try to strengthen her legs. Did she have polio or I can't remember? And so she would just run everywhere. And then pretty soon she was really good at running. And, and she was also African-American, during the 1960s. Right. So, she was very key. And then Janet Evans from just down the 91 freeway, was just a really cool person, was about my age. So, I thought she was really cool. She's from Southern California. And then Michelle Kwan never won the, probably the most beautiful figure skater, sort of like Greg Louganis in diving, sort of that athleticism plus aesthetics, creating this kind of merger of both in sport, power and grace, you might say. So that's my Rushmore for women. So I want to show one last thing. It has nothing to do with America. It's a clip. And just to set it up a little bit, it's about Sohn Ki Chung carrying the Olympic. Well, I'll show you the beginning and then the end, and then I'll talk about the end first and then the beginning because there's a backstory to this. But this is Sohn Ki Chung as an old man carrying the Olympic flame in the 1988 Olympics, and then we're going to see when he won the marathon in the 1936 Olympics. There's German commentary. This is the only, I couldn't find anything in English, so I have it muted. But here he is, 52 years after his win at the marathon in 1936 Olympics. Here's him winning, or here's him being crowned. And you saw the red sun of Japan on his chest. Now you see people saluting Hitler and Hitler saluting back. So, one thing that was key about this was he was an Asian. And much like Jesse Owens, he proved he outran the German runners and all the other Caucasian white runners to win the marathon. Okay, there he is. You can't quite see. Later you'll see the Japanese red sun. Sohn, his last name was Sohn, Sohn. I think this was the German, or one of those guys. Oh, yeah. And there he is with the seal of Japan. I think that was the German guy. I can't remember exactly who his main competitors were. Now he's off by himself. He's winning. He's being cheered on by the Japanese that are in the crowd. It's a long race. We're getting towards the punchline, folks. And the marathon is sort of the last, it's usually the last event, the male marathon, because, the marathon actually was from ancient Greece. There was a town of Marathon, and somebody ran 26 miles from Marathon, Greece, to Athens to report on a battle, and then immediately collapsed. The modern distance isn't quite the same as that ancient. They actually kind of, I can't remember why they tweaked it just a little bit. It's just over 26 miles. So here he is coming in to win a gold medal for Japan. And, here he is recovering. It's a difficult ordeal for him. A very difficult ordeal. And, oh, wait a second. Look at the spelling of his name. It's not S-O-H-N. It's S-O-N. Well, part of the difficulty and the ordeal is he was Korean. And he was made to run for Japan because Japan was, occupied Korea from 1910 to 1945. And this was in 1936. It was during the extremely brutal occupation of Korea by the Japanese. And Sohn, 52 years later, gets this wonderful moment where he's able to, as a Korean, carry the torch into the stadium. It's not the same stadium that he ran into to win the marathon. That's in Berlin. But, here he is as a Korean, triumphant into a stadium in Seoul, Korea, cheered on not by Japanese, but by a Korean under his own name with the Korean spelling of his name, which has an H in it. He gets this moment towards the end of his life. And it was a wonderful, wonderful moment. And an example of, I talk about how there's a lot of bad politics with commercialism and, all sorts of things that make me a little uncomfortable when watching the Olympics. But there are moments of healing. There are moments of camaraderie. There are moments of fellowship. Even though it reflects some of the worst aspects of globalism, the Olympics also reflect some of the best aspects of globalism and aspects of globalism that we just cross our fingers and say, we hope that these win out in the end of the day. And I think that we are reminded every 4 years of certain aspects of international cooperation and fair play and camaraderie and fellowship. So, I do continue to watch the Olympics. I'm a little bit more jaded on them than I was 20 years ago. But I remain hopeful that the better angels of our nature, so to speak, will win out in the end of the day, and that we will be able to contest these international sporting events in ways that are very positive for the international political landscape. We'll talk about that. This is the final lecture, but we will talk on Tuesday, early next week. I will see you to talk more about the Olympics. I'll see you then.